Hi everyone, this is Hana. Recently, I witnessed a strange crossfire in an online debate space. It started with the news of the US ICE agent fatally shooting unarmed American citizens. A Russian netizen left a furious comment. "This is a pure murder. Stop state violence." Then suddenly, dozens of replies flooded in. The arrows of public anger weren't aimed at the ICE agent who caused the tragedy. They were aimed at the Russians' nationality. As if they were waiting for it, people brought up Russia's invasion of Ukraine and started tearing her apart. Isn't what you guys are doing in Ukraine murder too? Do Russians even have the right to talk about human rights? Cornered, the Russian defended herself, feeling deeply wronged. Not all Russians support Putin. Don't equate ordinary citizens with a crazy dictator. What happened next was truly fascinating. The Americans who were just attacking her weirdly agreed with her logic and put up their own shield. Right. What the US government doesn't represent the will of all Americans. Just like Trump doesn't represent all of us. Watching all this as a third party, a Korean, I couldn't help but chuckle. When it comes to the sins of other nations, they apply strict guilt by association. But when asked about their own country's sins, they quickly cut ties, saying, "I'm different from my government." It was such a blatant double standard. We live in an era where even wars are fought on social media. Recently, when the US and Israel illegally invaded Iran, many Americans said on social media, like, "I don't support this war. I didn't vote for Trump." It looked like they were desperately trying to get a free pass for moral asylum from their country's sins. While they write on social media from their comfortable couch for their own moral self satisfaction, the taxes they pay and the leaders they elected through their proud democratic system are dropping bombs on an elementary school in a foreign land. But what's even more mind blowing is this: the Americans who benefit from the very system that pushed the button never worry about bombs dropping on their own front yards. Their resistance costs them zero actual price and poses zero threat to their own survival. The Winter Olympic ended recently. When their country wins a gold medal and achieve glory in the Olympic or the World Cup, people wave their flags and cheer, proudly calling it "my country" or "our country," right? But when their country starts a war and shakes the fate of another nation, they step back and say, "That's the government's doing, not mine." People personalize their country's glory, but outsource its shame. But whether it's a dictatorship or a democracy, we cannot deny one truth. It is the silence of the majority that create and maintain that power. Doing nothing is actually the most powerful way to maintain the status quo. It's like giving an unlimited blank check to power. People desperately want to be innocent bystanders. But those who simply watch a broken system grow into a monster definitely share the blame. When we go abroad, right after asking for names, this is the question we ask each other the most. Where are you from? When we look at others, we first see the giant flag standing behind them. But when we look in the mirror, we only want to see a good individual with the flag completely erased. This treasure comedy is constantly happening in various forms all around us. So, my question is, can we ever truly be free from our country? A remote island in southeastern Thailand, a place that only appears as a tiny dot after zooming in on the map app over and over. On this island, which seemed like a zero gravity zone untouched by the world's rules, the only public authority was a tiny police station and a few incredibly laid back local cops. Through that loose gap, drifters like me from all over the world gathered. We are all running away from somewhere, from the suffocating city lives, from forced social obligations, or from the giant system called the state. The reason I pushed myself to hide in that remote dot, taking an 8 hour night bus from Bangkok and a 3 hour ferry, was clear. I wanted to escape the ugly reality I had to witness in famous tourist spots like Bangkok, Pattaya, or Phuket. It was mentally exhausting for me to watch white men in their 60s and 70s walking down the street, holding hands with the local underage girls who were young enough to be their granddaughters. To avoid that toxic atmosphere created by capital and racial hierarchy, I chose the most isolated place possible. At least that hard to reach island was free from those sins. I believe that place was a pure sanctuary for exiles, untouched by the stench of imperialism. I finally believed I had achieved true freedom on that island. I thought I could peel off the heavy label of South Korea, which is sometimes proud but sometimes suffocating, and just exist purely as me. On that island, nationality was just a burdensome overcoat. People cared much more about what they saw during the morning dive and the taste of the beer after dive rather than the color of each other's passports. We refused to be cogs in the giant machine called the state. We redefined ourselves as islanders and fully soaked in the liberation of being stateless. In 2022, even when the whole world was consumed by the news of Russia invading Ukraine, my island was surreally peaceful. On the mainland, missiles were flying, people were losing their homes and crying out in agony over lost loved ones. But all that massive tragedy just felt like something from another dimension trapped in the tiny pixels of a smartphone screen. On our tropical paradise island, we forgot the hell of others so easily. For divers like us, jumping into the ocean every day, the only thing that mattered were today's wind, ocean current, and underwater visibility. But that too was an arrogant luxury for drifters, only made possible within the safety net guaranteed by our own countries. I just didn't realize that back then. That illusion reached its absolute peak on Sergei and Lana's wedding day, a Russian groom and a Ukrainian bride. Back in their homelands, they would be pointing guns at each other as bitter enemies. But standing under the palm trees of a tiny little remote island, they were just an ordinary man and woman deeply in love. I was so moved by the fact that even the grand narrative of a war couldn't tear apart the love of individuals. Seeing their smiles that seemed to whisper, "We are in the same boat," I was convinced that borders or nations were just meaningless ink marks drawn on a map. The naive "we are the world" fantasy that humans can love and stand together simply as humans without the grand restriction of a nation? I foolishly believed it. But it didn't take long for that illusion to shatter completely. The island wasn't a paradise on earth. It was micro earth compressed with the entire world's prejudice and hate. I slowly realized that I was also human who couldn't escape that gravity even an inch. The first one to betray me was myself. It was my deep rooted identity as a Korean. I acted like a cool global citizen who didn't care about nationality. But whenever I faced my Japanese and Chinese friends, a subtle geopolitical triangle carved into my DNA started to stir. When I saw a Japanese person acting innocent and perfectly polished without a single apology for their past history, I would secretly exchange a knowing look with my Chinese friend. There was definitely a strong unspoken solidarity of victims that we understood without words. We secretly bonded, despising the imperial arrogance hidden behind the two-faced kindness of the Japanese. On the other hand, when Chinese people ignored the public etiquette or acted out of line, I naturally formed a silent consensus with my Japanese friends. Sharing a look with my Japanese friend that said, they never change. We felt a shallow sense of being accomplices in our shared superiority. There was definitely a pendulum swinging between pretty inferiority and shallow superiority deep inside me. Even out there on an island in the middle of the vast ocean, I was still like a fish caught in the invisible net woven by nation, history, and culture. It wasn't just me. The inner minds of those from the so-called advanced Western countries were tangled in a much more complex historical and geopolitical food chain. A British friend suddenly flexed that he came from a wealthy family by showing a picture of his castle-like house, like something out of a movie. But even though they were both British, he mocked his friend just for having red hair, calling him ginger. And he openly locked down on a friend from Wales, treating him like a country hick. Even under the single flag of the UK, they strictly divided themselves by class and roots. The French hated the British and despised the Americans. The British laughed at the French, calling them frogs, and treated Americans like the dumb old brother exiled by Britain. Not to mention the suffocating rigidity of the Germans. Outwardly, they smiled and clinked beer glasses, but inwardly, they coldly ranked and judged each other's class. In that spider web tangled with old world pride, new world capital, class, race, gender, region, and religions, an equal individual simply did not exist. Humans were sad animals who confirmed their own status only by looking down on others. The strength of the food chain seeps deeply into our daily lives. Recently, the comment section of this channel turned into a brutal battlefield of hate. It was a totally unexpected irony to a video where I, as a Korean, self-reflected on the racism issues within our own society. The commenters from Southeast Asia assumed that I, as an individual, represented the entire of South Korea. I get it. They suddenly transformed into patriot and poured all kinds of hate, curses, and mockery directly at me. They even used the pain of the Sewol ferry tragedy, the Itaewon tragedy, and even the agony of the Korean comfort woman victims from the Japanese colonial era as ammunition to mock and provoke me. Can you imagine putting so much time and energy into hate, even studying the deeply painful history of another country just to intentionally inflict emotional wounds on someone? Can we really detach ourselves from our country? But the very people attacking me never speak up about the arrogance and exploitation by white people happening in their own homelands. They can't even raise their heads at the real powerful ones at the top of the triangle. Instead, we focus on shooting arrows horizontally at easier, softer targets just to taste a cheap sense of victory. In the cowardly, inherited cycle of hate, I witnessed the exact horrific mechanism that drove humanity to ruin during World War II. Hiding behind the name of nation, completely castrating the ability to empathize with others' pain, and defining the other person only as a target to be destroyed. That cruel, blind collectivism. The psychological background where a mad crown dehumanized the Jewish people and massacred their own neighbors 80 years ago is now being recreated as a digital version across borders right in the comment sections of social media. And there I was as Asian woman who could never reach the top of the food chain. In their eyes, I wasn't an equal colleague in diving industry. I was just a honey, always told, don't be shy. I was just a submissive and obedient Oriental doll. Once, my Western friends called me baby, honey, and sweetie so much that I snapped and said, don't call me baby. I even had to tell a friend who kept saying, don't be shy, I'm not being shy, I'm being humble. The words they used, disguised as friendly affection, proved they never truly saw me as an equal professional. We all know that Western European countries have strict regulation, severe punishment, and high sensitivity regarding sexism, racism, and hate speech. Men from Northern and Western Europe who acted like gentlemen and feminists, showing off their highly polished civic awareness back home, didn't feel the need to act like they did in their home countries on a small, remote Thai island. On that tiny, isolated tropical island, where strict laws and the eyes of social surveillance disappeared, they stripped off their civilized masks and revealed their raw nature. To some of them, that island wasn't a community to protect and respect. It was a giant adult playground where they could temporarily turn off their ethics and morals, a lawless sanctuary. The freedom they enjoyed was nothing more than a toxic release of power, felt by trampling on someone else's dignity. But the real war started when I shattered their Oriental fantasy. When I studied harder than them, built superior dive skills, became a high level instructor, and proved my utter competent, their eyes shift from desire to fear and jealousy. In their mental database, a category for an Asian woman who is far more capable than me, a white man, simply did not exist. When I swam deeper, longer, and calmer than them on the water, earning deep respect from students and building a solid reputation with my skills, they felt a rage that went way beyond embarrassment. It's something like, how dare you? An easy Asian woman is threatening my fragile superiority as a white man. Instead of becoming fair colleagues who represented my hard earned skill, they became extremely territorial and played dirty politics to crush me down. They belittled my solid achievements as pure luck or the result of using my femininity and tried to shake my position by sneakily isolating me from information. But back in Korea, I was already sick and tired to my core of office politics from both men and women alike. This wasn't even bold, confident violence worded by the strong against the weak. I already knew it was just the pathetic insecurity of cowards flaring around to protect their own paper thin egos. Underwater, I had to fight currents trying to swallow me whole. And out of the water, I had to fight their rotten sense of entitlement. Just as I was getting completely exhausted by the hypocrisy on the island, I witnessed a totally different kind of hierarchy. I flew to the other side of the planet, to Tulum and Playa del Carmen in Mexico, to expand my dive skills, knowledge, and experience as a diver. It wasn't a lazy, dreamy resort like the Thai island. It was a raw, unforgiving jungle tangled with massive capital, violence, and raw survivor. I was completely mesmerized by the wonder and mystery of exploring cenotes, underwater caves holding the deep, ancient history of the earth, feeling like I was gliding through the earth veins. But the reality the moment I stepped out of the water was, in fact, a tragedy itself. It was a land where the massive capitalism of a modern US grotesquely intertwined with the sad, lingering ghost of haciendas, the old Spanish colonial plantations. Before the deep scars of colonial rule even had a chance to heal, the US dollars bulldozed in, remodeling the Mexican land into just another type of plantation. When the COVID-19 pandemic exploded and all flights returning to Korea or Thailand were canceled, I unintentionally got trapped in Mexico for 6 full months. Lockdowns were declared and strict curfews were enforced. At that time, the state government in my region completely shut down and stopped functioning. But shockingly, during that crisis, it wasn't the government that brought trucks full of daily supplies and food to the starving locals every single day. It was the local cartel. The very people I only knew from movies as ruthless villains who murdered and sell drugs were actually feeding the citizens that the government had completely abandoned. In a vacuum where the state were absent, power naturally flowed to the most brutal hands. They packaged that violent power as mercy and slowly devoured the local souls. In that deeply contradictory situation, the cartel was an object of absolute terror, but simultaneously the only savior for the locals. A local Mexican friend told me that as the cartel weaves so deeply into the community, the neighborhood kids naturally grow up aspiring to be members of the cartel. To those kids, the cartel isn't a criminal syndicate. It's the only functional system protecting them, their very ecosystem itself. Even in Mexico, the US capital is incredibly blunt and ruthless. Even while a deadly virus was sweeping the globe, the construction of the massive US mega resort never stopped for a single day. Early in the morning, local Mexican laborers, without even proper masks to protect themselves, sat crammed in the back of giant trucks heading to the sites. The giant monster called Capital consumes Mexican labor at a terrifyingly cheap rate. The workers drink more Coca Cola than actual water simply because it's cheaper than a bottle of water there. To be honest, I also found myself drinking a lot of Coke while I was there. That black, sugar loaded liquid is cheap fuel to help them endure the immediate, bone crushing labor. Countless people suffer from severe diabetes, and tragically, even that sickness loops back into massive profits for giant US pharmaceutical capital. It's a devastating, inescapable cycle. But at night, after an exhaustingly hard day, ordinary Mexican people held a simple taco and a shot of tequila in their hands and smiled the most genuinely beautiful smiles in the world. Facing that incredibly strong vitality and their somewhat sad smiles, I felt a strange, profound nobility that I couldn't dare to pity or claim to fully understand. It looked so much like us in Korea, sitting at a plastic table in a street alley after work, swallowing our deep fatigue with a piece of pork belly, samgyeopsal, and a hard shot of soju. It shared so many emotional similarities with Korea's heavily scarred history, deep sentiments, and sorrows. Being thoroughly used and objectified as a tools by the state and capital, yet never losing their rhythmic joy and human smiles. That was raw, undeniable dignity. Something that people who arrogantly critique the world with a few taps on their smartphones can absolutely never possess. In the middle of that chaos, I also experienced a defining moment of disillusionment. There was a middle aged US woman. She was a genuinely kind and wonderful person who took my dive instructor course back on the Thai island because she wanted to teach diving to children with developmental disability in her hometown in the US. I firmly believed she possessed a clunky but genuine goodness. Because I felt her warm heart for those kids were completely sincere, I trusted her deeply. But then came a terrifying time when Donald Trump intentionally provoked racial hate by calling COVID 19 the China virus, and innocent Asians were getting brutally assaulted on the streets for no reason. When I, filled with despair, posted a critique of Trump's dangerous words on my social media, she completely flipped. The personal goodness she had always shown me seemed utterly powerless in front of the giant, blinding religion called her nation. How dare you insult our president? Was Trump wrong? Through social media, she heard unspeakable curses and insults at me while fiercely defending Trump. The warm, compassionate heart of that wealthy US lady who loved the disabled children vanished into thin air. Only a fanatical mega zealot remained. To her, I was no longer a respected instructor or a friend. I was just an arrogant Asian daring to scratch the untouchable glory of the great United States. For someone who attached her entire self worth to her nation's achievements, Criticizing her president was exactly the same as a violent personal attack on her own identity. The color of political ideology was so much thicker than personal conscience or basic humanity. Political madness was vastly stronger than years of built up friendship or trust. I realized something profound right then. Some people comfortably cut ties in their cozy beds saying, I have absolutely nothing to do with this government, while others widely swing swords saying, my country is me. But in the end, both groups are exactly the same. They both hide behind their carefully selected image of the nation and violently exclude the others. Her warm hospitality and sweetness were only ever valid within the borders of her own tribe. In the end, there is no paradise on earth. Neither a breathtaking remote island nor the world outside Mexico's mystical caves is a paradise. I foolishly thought I would be totally free once I stepped out of the state system. But the state isn't just an external system, it's like a microchip permanently planted in our brains. It follows us all the way to a low-risk remote island on the exact opposite side of the globe, even deep into a jungle. I began to wonder if we are all just the mechanical parts that can only run on an operating system called a country. Hypocrisy, hate, exploitation, and madness. And that operating system called the country was constantly commanding us in real time on exactly who to empathize with and who to passionately hate. Ironically, what finally pulled me back to Korea wasn't simply homesickness. It was Han. I already told you many times before. Han is like deep, unresolved sorrow. On the last night of October 2022, I was hanging out with friends on a small remote paradise island, enjoying a lively Halloween party. Through the booming, chaotic music, a close British friend suddenly walked up to me and shoved his smartphone screen right in my face and said, Hey Hana, look at this. A Korean kid is doing some kind of crazy Squid Game flash mob right now? He asked me. The screen was total pandemonium, but it wasn't unfamiliar to me. A narrow, steep, sloping alley and the very familiar neon signs of the Hamilton Hotel. It was that exact Itaewon Hamilton alley where I used to hang out constantly using my magazine editor job as an excuse to party. At first, I thought exactly like my friend did. Oh, Gen Z kids these days are playing these incredible realistic flash mobs. Haha. But as I stared at the screen for 1 second, 2 seconds, longer, a freezing chill ran straight down my spine. Those screams weren't fake acting, and the terrifying pale faces of people stacked on the top of each other weren't staged for a show. My deepest instincts rang a deafening alarm. This is a real situation. I turned completely pale and desperately shouted to my friends that this wasn't a game. It was a real, horrific tragedy happening right at this second, and real people were dying. The shocked foreign friends were all completely speechless. Occasionally, they kept muttering, Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Hana. Oh, it's too bad. Feeling genuinely sorry. But that was exactly where it stopped. To them, this event was just another unfortunate, tragic news clip happening on the complete opposite side of the globe. It was not their own direct visceral pains. Right at the moment, I decide to fully and unconditionally accept the nationality Korea that I had tried so desperately to deny and escape. For citizens of other countries, nationality might just be a convenient costume you put on or take off when needed. But I realized that for Koreans, it is like our very skin. It bleeds profoundly if you try to rip it off. Koreans are permanently turned into a certain frequency of sorrow that can absolutely never be detected from the safe distance of people holding other passports. There is simply no language to explain the completely helpless, crushed, and infected heart of Koreans who had to watch the Seoul ferry sink on live television, who suffered from a massive collective PTSD after enduring endless, entirely preventable social tragedies. The crushing reality hit me that no matter how close my foreign friends were, they could never, ever tune into this massive, overwhelming frequency of sorrow. In the end, I would be a Korean even if I die and woke up in another life. I feel a heavy, undeniable responsibility to accept the dark stains of our community as my very own, even if the fault was mine. And I feel deeply, intensely proud of the community's glory, even if I didn't contribute a single thing to it. Koreans are exactly that kind of people. A community bound by a shared destiny that inherited this land's extreme hardship and brilliant glory as a single package. Normally, Korean we fight tooth and nail, pulling each other's hair, relentlessly blaming and tearing each other apart. But standing in front of a massive national tragedy, we unite with a terrifyingly powerful cohesion. Korean, we are people with an intense, almost toxic solidarity that fiercely comforts each other's bleeding wounds. From the agonizing memory of colonial rule, when we were stripped of our sovereignty, to the brutal war and division and the devastating IMF financial crisis, our entire modern history is a highly unique history of solidarity, forged and sharpened through the intense sharing of pain. So at the moment, instead of wearing the comfortable clothes of an outsider and pretending to be fine, laughing and chatting with a drink in my hand, I decide to return to the sides of the people who share the exact same code of pain as me. A place where we can somehow manage to live by filling the gaps with each other's blunt warmth, even if we are all just broken and shattered pieces. The damn exhausting land of love and hate, where people we genuinely hurt for the scars on my skin as if they were bleeding themselves. Shortly after, I wrapped up nearly 10 years of my wandering life abroad and boarded a flight straight back to Korea. The powerful gravity of the country I had run away from pulled me back in the most tragically heartbreaking way. It wasn't a surrender or a defeat. It was a proud, deliberate return to my true destiny that I was finally ready to carry. So I dive into the ocean of my mind. Up on land, I live fiercely as a Korean who is entirely willing to get hurt and share the heavy responsibilities. But sometimes when that massive gravity crushed my chest and I feel like I can't breathe, I bite down on my regulator and descend deep into the blue water. The moment the surface completely closes over my head and the deafening, chaotic noise of the world is instantly blocked out with the sound of my bubbles, right at that very second, I finally achieved true, complete asylum from the state, from capital, and from the completely exhausting hatred of humans. There are absolutely no borders underwater. No Russia, no Ukraine, no South Korea, no North Korea, no Japan, no Mexico, no United States, no Thailand. There is no violent cartel replacing a broken government, no greedy capital exploiting exhausted workers. The shallow hypocrisy of securing moral superiority on social media, the cowardly horizontal violence of mocking another country's bleeding tragedy, none of that can ever penetrate the giant, heavy blue curtain of the sea. Down here, dividing people by blonde or black hair, discriminating between white and black Asian skin, or the rigid class differences between the rich and the poor are all completely meaningless. No matter how infinitely rich you are, you cannot buy a single breath underwater. No matter how high and mighty your political power is, you cannot swim against the flow of the ocean current. Everyone is exactly the same, a fragile but absolutely equal organism, relying entirely on one single tank, 200 bar, of compressed air to stay alive. Above all, this is a world of pure silence where you don't have to speak English, the dominant language of the most powerful empire in the world. Instead of the flashy, sharp, and violent language used to hurt each other, to be sarcastic, and to fiercely prove some pretty sense of superiority, it is a place where only clunky, basic hand signals means entirely for mutual survival are exchanged. Are you okay? Breathe. Let's go together. The very same humans who divided nationality and skin colors to maliciously scratch each other out of the water, underwater, they constantly check other people's remaining air pressure and gladly, willingly become each other's literal lifelines. In that absolute heavy silence and pure resilience, I finally meet the complete, unburdened me. Not someone's easy honey or exotic baby, not a convenient target of racial hate or political mockery, just a single organism breathing regularly and gliding through the water. The only true sanctuary completely untouched by those foolish bloodlines the humans on land frantically draw and fight over. Even if above the surface is still a ruthless battlefield where you have to violently trample someone just to prove your own existence, below the surface is, and always will be, a peaceful universe. That is exactly why for the past several years, I strap a heavy air tank to my back every single day and threw myself into the water multiple times a day. Ironically, to proudly endure as a responsible, heavy adult on land, I desperately needed that zero gravity space where I could become completely light, without a name, without a face, and without a nationality. Because that space is the only asylum I'm allowed, the only true country of freedom. This has been Hana's Island. If my story resonates with you, please support the channel with a like and subscribe. And let's meet right here again next time. Until then, stay perfectly comfortable on your own latitude. Welcome to Hana's Island. You're safe here now. Take care. Bye.